The air is heavy, but not with rain. Not today. It's the dry season, and what drifts over the parched red earth of eastern Nigeria isn't mist. It's smoke. Acrid, bitter, carried on the wind like a whisper of something burning far away. A market? A home? A memory? Chickens cluck nervously in the distance, but the silence of hunger drowns out even their cries. Somewhere, a child stares up at the sky, not with wonder, but with a belly so distended and eyes so wide you wonder if he sees anything at all. Welcome to Biafra, 1967. Hope has fled the borders. And the world. Mostly, it watches. The seeds of war were planted long before the shooting started. Colonial Britain, in its infinite wisdom, drew a nation on a map with all the precision of a blindfolded toddler. The result? Nigeria, a patchwork of over 250 ethnic groups, with three major powerhouses: the Hausa Fulani in the north, the Yoruba in the west, and the Igbo in the east. These weren't just cultural divides. They were political, religious, and deeply personal. It's one thing to live next to your neighbor. It's another to pretend you were born in the same house. Fast forward to 1960. Nigeria gains independence. Fireworks, flags, and chaos. Beneath the new anthem and the fragile smiles was a bitter scramble for power. The Igbo, known for their education and influence in the civil service, quickly became a target of envy and suspicion. Tension simmered, then boiled, then blew the lid off in 1966. 2 military coups in 1 year. The first was led largely by Igbo officers. The second, a bloody counter-coup, unleashed a wave of vengeance that made the first look like a scuffle at a town hall. In the north, pogroms erupted. Tens of thousands of Igbos were slaughtered in the streets, their homes set ablaze, their bodies unburied. Survivors fled south by the trainload, if the trains even made it, and then came the declaration. On May 30th, 1967, Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu stood before the world and declared the eastern region an independent republic. Biafra was born, not out of pride, but desperation. A people cornered. A last gasp of sovereignty. Nigeria responded the way most post-colonial states do when a piece of them tries to walk away, with tanks. The war began with a dull thud, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Lagos launched Operation Unify, like naming a hammer before slamming it down. The Nigerian military, better funded and internationally supported, moved swiftly to retake Biafran territory. But Biafran fighters, many young, many barely trained, resisted with a tenacity that stunned even their enemies. They weren't just fighting for land. They were fighting not to vanish. But even bravery has limits. By late 1967, Biafra was surrounded, a noose tightened by land, sea, and sky. Nigeria imposed a blockade so brutal it didn't just starve soldiers, it starved everyone. Food, medicine, fuel, nothing got in. And what little remained inside Biafra vanished quickly into the stomachs of generals or the black market. The rest? Well, the rest withered. And here begins the part the world couldn't ignore, mostly because the photos made sure of it. Children, barely skin and bones, stared out from black and white prints in European newspapers, their bellies grotesquely swollen, hair tinged with rust from malnutrition. Kwashiorkor, they called it, a medical term that became a household word, and a guilt trip for a generation. It's one thing to bomb a city. It's another to starve it. In clinics lit by candlelight, foreign doctors from humanitarian groups like Médecins Sans Frontières tried to treat diseases they barely had the tools for. It was like bailing water with a spoon on a sinking ship. Admirable, but largely symbolic. Mothers lined up with limp children, hoping for powdered milk, hoping for anything. Nurses cried quietly behind curtained partitions, knowing they'd turn many away. But Biafra didn't just suffer in silence. They fought a second war, this one for sympathy. Using crude films, dramatic speeches, and a surprisingly effective propaganda machine, Biafra beamed its suffering to the world. It worked, sort of. Ireland, France, and a few other countries offered some support. The Pope sent prayers. There were airdrops of food. But the big powers? Britain backed Nigeria. The Soviet Union, too. The United States offered condolences and careful neutrality, the usual Cold War chessboard. Still, hope flickered. There were a few victories, small, symbolic. The Biafran army captured some towns. A handmade airstrip nicknamed Uli Airport became a lifeline, where cargo planes landed in pitch blackness with food and medicine, dodging anti-aircraft guns and broken dreams. It was brave. It was insane. It was all they had. Yet every Biafran advance was met with a Nigerian counterpunch, and always, always the blockade held. Hunger was the weapon that needed no trigger, and it was winning. As 1968 wore on, cities began to fall: Enugu, Port Harcourt, and Nsukka. Each loss, not just a point on the map, but a knife in the heart of a dying nation. And as Nigerian troops rolled in, civilians poured out. Refugees clogged the roads, carrying whatever they could, sometimes just memories. Villages became camps. Camps became graves. At night, the sound of gunfire mixed with the cry of the wounded and the howl of the hungry. And still, the world debated who was right. Meanwhile, a 3-year-old girl named Amaka clutched a rag doll made from bundled cloth and watched her mother die quietly under a tree. No headlines, just dust. This was war, Biafran style. Less explosions, more erosion. Not sudden death, but the slow, grinding extinguishing of a people. And yet Biafra did not give up. Not then, because how do you surrender when the alternative is annihilation? The rains came, but they brought no relief. By 1969, Biafra was less a nation and more a slow-motion tragedy, spread across makeshift refugee camps, hospitals without medicine, and towns half buried under the weight of defeat. Every breath taken in Biafra felt borrowed. The land itself seemed exhausted. Crops wouldn't grow. Rivers carried disease. Even the trees, once lush and defiant, now looked brittle, as if they too had given up. But Ojukwu hadn't. The Biafran leader still wore his uniform crisp, still gave speeches with the fire of a man convinced that salvation hovered just beyond the horizon. Maybe in the form of foreign reinforcements, maybe through one last military gamble, or maybe just through faith. Raw, blinding faith in a cause that now seemed more myth than movement. The people still listened, though fewer believed. And the children, well, they stopped listening altogether. Hunger has a way of drowning out even the most passionate patriotism. Across the front lines, Nigeria grew bolder. With British arms and Soviet aircraft, their offensives became relentless. Whole regions were reduced to dust and craters. Roads vanished. Rail lines twisted. Airstrikes became background noise. By now, the war wasn't just about territory. It was about exhausting the will to resist. And it was working. Mercenaries joined the fray. Europeans, some ex-Foreign Legion drawn by money or boredom or an unsettling taste for chaos. They brought their own kind of brutality and their own rules. On both sides, discipline frayed. Civilians bore the brunt, as always. Villages cleared by both armies became no-man's lands of ghost huts and scattered sandals. The final year of the war was a kind of unraveling. Even Biafran soldiers, those who still had boots and rifles, were gaunt shadows of their former selves. Ammo was scarce. Food even more so. Hospitals stopped counting the dead because numbers became meaningless. The bodies came in wheelbarrows, on bicycles, in the arms of grieving mothers who no longer screamed. There was no point. Grief had become a routine. But if war is horror, it's also theater. And Biafra, remarkably, kept performing. In foreign capitals, Biafran diplomats still lobbied, still hosted press events, still begged for intervention with the polished desperation of men who knew the lights were going out. France continued its quiet support, less for love of Biafra, more to weaken Britain. The Vatican sent aid. Some missionaries stayed, but no miracle arrived. Instead, January 1970 brought only silence. Heavy, unfamiliar silence. Ojukwu, sensing the end, fled into exile in Côte d'Ivoire, leaving the sinking ship to his second-in-command, Philip Effiong. And it was Effiong who stood before the Nigerian leadership, and uttered the words many had longed for and others feared. We accept the ceasefire. No negotiations, no conditions, just surrender. And with that, Biafra died. Not with a bang, but with a bow. But Nigeria didn't dance on its grave. Not quite. There were no mass reprisals despite the blood and bitterness. No victor, no vanquished, declared General Yakubu Gowon in a tone that tried for unity but landed somewhere between exhaustion and uneasy triumph. The war was over. The wounds had just begun. So what did it leave behind? Over 1 million people dead, many from hunger, many children, an entire generation traumatized, ethnic wounds that still itch beneath Nigeria's political skin, and a bitter lesson about what happens when a country's parts don't fit, but are forced to hold hands anyway. The legacy of Biafra echoes today, even if the world has moved on. In Nigeria, Biafra isn't just history, it's politics, memory, cautionary tale. There are still whispers of secession, still flags waved at protests, still songs sung about that short-lived republic. And online, whole movements have risen, some calling for independence, others simply shouting into the digital void that they haven't forgotten. Because forgetting would be easier. Too easy. But how do you forget a war where the enemy wasn't just a gun, but hunger itself? Where the world watched, wept, and then turned the page? How do you forget little Emeka, who thought powdered milk was magic and once clutched a spoon like a toy? How do you forget mothers who lied to their children, food is coming, until they believed it themselves? And how do you forget a war that left no monuments, only scars? Even the land remembers. Old bomb craters now fill with rainwater. Abandoned airstrips crumble beneath the weight of weeds. Graves, many unmarked, lie under soccer fields and village squares. And still, the stories linger, in lullabies, in cautious silences at family gatherings, in the eyes of elders who pause too long before answering questions. The Biafran War wasn't just a conflict. It was a slow, agonizing unmaking of a dream of identity, of safety, of a homeland for a people who felt orphaned inside their own country. It was also a warning that colonial borders, once drawn, don't heal just because someone signed a paper. That national unity forced with bullets often bleeds long after the shooting stops, and that starvation, that quietest of killers, can be louder than any bomb. Today, Nigeria moves forward, busy, chaotic, resilient. But beneath the traffic jams and tech startups and pop music lies a quiet question. Could it happen again? The answer, unspoken, floats like ash. So now we breathe. Let the dust settle. Let the echoes fade. History isn't just what happened, it's what lingers. And the Biafran War, though etched into the past, leaves fingerprints on the present. In quiet conversations, in books children read, in the wary glance between communities still learning how to trust. We look back, not to reopen wounds, but to understand them, to trace the lines of pain and remember who we were, what we chose, and what we lost. Maybe you're left with images. The child under the tree, the airstrip in the dark, the silence after surrender. Let those stay with you a while. Let them remind you that war isn't abstract. It has a taste, a smell, a heartbeat. It wears a human face. But also let yourself step away, back into the present. Because while history can haunt, it can also teach. We learn, we reflect, and we try, not always well, not always fast, but we try to do better. So exhale, stretch, and leave this story behind gently, like setting down a heavy book. And if you ever hear the word Biafra again, on the news, in a conversation, in some dusty textbook, you'll know, not just the dates and the stats, but the beating heart beneath them. You'll remember. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help others remember too. If this story stirred you, even a little, share it. Let someone else hear the silence of Biafra. Pass it on, because the past doesn't vanish when the war ends, it lingers, and sometimes it just needs a voice.